and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton. And today we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to most of our hearts. It is our assessments, our home values, the importance of our most significant investment for most of us. And that's putting a lot of weight on this guest, who is Gary James, the city's new assessor. Welcome.
Good morning.
First of all, you came in like at the announcement of this year's assessments. Like you kind of walked into a trial of fire here.
Yes, I started just as the notices have gone out to notify everybody of the changes for this year's reassessment. Picked up sort of at the end. I have a super staff that has put together all of those numbers that reflect what the market has done over the recent past and forms the basis for the assessments and then ultimately the taxes.
Now, we're going to talk about that in a little bit later.
Absolutely.
But first of all, just so people get to know you, you have been in this business, assessing in real estate, for how many years now?
About 27 years. I was an appraiser for 17 years, and then I went over to the other side, which is the city and county side, as an assessor for the last 7 or 8 years.
In a variety of localities.
Correct. South Carolina, Maine, South Carolina again, and then up here to Hampton.
One of the things that struck me when you were doing your presentation for council was, we look at the historical graphs of how property rapidly escalated and then the crash happened. And of course, we know it happened everywhere, but you had a little bit of a different perspective because all we kind of look at is what happened in Hampton.
Correct. The great rise up and then the recession really impacted various different parts of the country in different ways. I was in parts of the country where there was a 40% drop in the Great Recession. Hampton really took a very small dip, partly because the increase in values over the early 2000s was not as great. So we have not reflected and seen reflected in our values a huge rise and then a huge fall. So we have sort of tempered the overall national trends, which is a good thing.
And I'm smiling because, for me, it was a big drop. And I think for a lot of people out there, it's a big drop. And we lose the perspective you bring that, boy, was it a lot worse than other places.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We had our share of all of the parts of the market, the foreclosures, the drop in values. But the big story and the big thing that is nice to know is that, A, we didn't drop as much, and B, we're increasing at a gradual rate, not so big that we're going to hit another crash here in Hampton, God forbid. But we had a high of the market of around 208,000 in the value of sales in Hampton back in 2010, 2011. We're at 205,000 in our sales now. So we're almost back to where we were when the peak of the market. So we lost a little. We went down into the maybe dropped 10%, maybe 15%. We didn't see the 40% drop in sales.
And see, we forget that because I think, 10 to 15 is a lot, is a big hit to take. But we got to realize this happened all over the country. And as you say, it was 40% in some places.
Right. And that's not to belittle the fact that a 10% hit is a 10% hit. It still hits your pocketbook in many ways. The good news is that it's back up. It's rising slowly. It's not dramatic. It's not like all of a sudden people's values are so high that A, they can't sell it, or B, their taxes are out of the woodwork or whatever. Mm-hmm. But the important thing is that the rise and fall has been less dramatic, and we're almost back to where we were.
Now, when you say back to where we were, you mean the average home sale.
Correct. In
Hampton, and you're excluding things like foreclosures or my mama selling her house to me kind of things.
Correct. Just arm's length, regular market sales is what we consider in those determinations of sale prices.
So that is almost back up to the that's kind of amazing.
Correct. The average sale price or median sale price in 11 was 208. We're now at 205. Another year of 1 to 2% increase. We had approximately a 2% increase this year. That brings us over what we were in 2011. So in theory, you've gained back what you've lost. So that should be a comfortable situation for everybody and take heart in that, okay, We saw the stock market drop and fall and rise and everything, and that's a different type of investment, but this is one that almost all of us participate in.
Right.
We have a home, and it's reflected in a lot of different ways, whether it's rents, whether it's mortgage payments, whether it's sales, and it reflects nicely on the tax base that the city is able to draw from, which hopefully as you get growth and you get those kinds of increases, it doesn't mean a huge increase in the tax rate that a typical owner would experience.
So when you say the typical sale price of a house, that is above the typical assessed price. The median assessed price throughout the city is actually lower than that.
That's correct. What we have found is that the homes that have been improved, renovated, fixed up, tend to be selling, and the ones that are not fixed up are not selling. So the sales price does not always reflect the actual average assessment or median assessment for our city. The difference in the sales prices of, let's say, just over 200 versus the average assessed value of a home in Hampton is around 155 to 160. So there's a difference, and that reflects the older housing stock in the city of Hampton, but it also reflects the affordability to live in Hampton. The cost or the average assessed value in Hampton is actually lower than it is in some of our neighboring municipalities, Newport News, Portsmouth, Chesapeake, whatever. And that makes it a more affordable place to live.
Well, you know, we were just named to smartassets.com one of the 25 most affordable beach communities in the country, and we're the only one in the Mid-Atlantic region. Like, that is a huge deal, and I think it's because in a lot of communities that are on the water, a lot of those old houses are gone, and you have kind of McMansions put up, and a lot of people can't afford to live there.
Right. I think Hampton has a unique opportunity here where we have access to the beaches for the affordable person, or the beach access is affordable. Mm-hmm. The homes to live in or to rent or whatever are modest. They're not the McMansions, but they're for the everyday person. And that's a good thing. It gives all of us access to the water, to the beach, to the amenities that come with that. And it's, quite frankly, to live here, it's cheaper than to live anywhere else. The taxes here, based on the tax rates and the assessed value, is substantially lower than our neighbors. So the carrying costs... Oh yeah, and
talk to somebody from the Northeast. Talk to somebody from New Jersey about our taxes. They'll just go crazy at how low they are. Correct.
Well, I've been one of those New Jersey folks who paid substantially more. But the affordability is something that is sort of a hidden asset that Hampton has. That's the good news. You can live here, have a nice home, and can afford it on just about any typical wage. I won't say minimum wage, but a typical wage. You can afford the property, and to live here, to buy here. A lot of the aspects of living here, having lived in many of these other more expensive areas, is very affordable, not just in the housing stock.
I think the challenge, though, is that a lot of the houses are old and they need stuff. And sometimes when people are buying, they want a house that's ready, that's already modern, or that's new. And so to keep that affordability, sometimes it means buying an older house and doing some of the work.
Right, right. And that, if you do renovations before or after a sale, you usually get back what you put in. When you have an affordable home that's on the moderate price range, anything you put in is generally going to increase in value. If you're at the top of the market, you put money in, you may not get it back. But
right.
We're in a unique opportunity here where we have some great properties, good bones in the structures. You renovate them. A lot of folks are coming in, renovating their properties. It adds value. We try to pick it up as an assessor, which you don't want us to do, but it does add value so that you do want to sell it and have the opportunity to sell it. You're going to be able to get some of that money back.
Well, you know, interestingly, I've heard people, when houses were reliably appreciating in the 2000s, people were like, really truly kind of not wanting it to happen because it was about the tax bill and it was about an increase. And after the dip, I think people are like, I hope my house is appreciating. Like, I want to see that value growing. And sometimes they don't see it year to year yet. I know on the average we're ticking up. But what do you say to folks who don't see that happening yet or don't see it as much as they would like?
You're not going to see the uptick unless you're very familiar with the market. If you're just living in a neighborhood that isn't improving the properties, you're not going to see that uptick. You're going to see that the assessments are not dramatically increasing. And in Hampton, we aren't increasing at an astronomical rate. 1 to 2, maybe 3% per year. That's a nice, steady growth. That's not the kind of growth that's going to take a big dive at some point. We're not going to burst and have a bubble that's burst. So the appreciation of that, the way you're going to get major appreciation back is to improve your home.
Well, but the other flip side is if people in my neighborhood are living in their homes and they're doing some of that work, but it's not necessarily building permit work, but they're upgrading, putting in new kitchen counters or upgrading their bathrooms, you don't see it unless the house sells. So if I'm in a stable neighborhood, people have lived there for 20 years, nobody's selling, my assessment might not be moving because you have no data.
We do the best we can to pick up what improvements are made.
Yeah.
Without a permit, we don't have access into the house unless you tell us or unless we see that there's been some renovations, a dumpster in the driveway or new windows that have been put in or a new roof. We can only pick up so much without permits. That's the good news for you because you're not really getting taxed on that. But the good news is that when that does sell, we will be picking that up, and you probably will be able to sell it. So I would say don't get discouraged because your assessments aren't going up. Doesn't mean that your value isn't increasing.
And that's what I'm trying to get at. How do you explain that to folks, the difference between your assessment and appraisal? You've done both. How are they different?
In theory, they're not different.
They should be market value is the goal.
We assess at market value. However,
and you have to, that's the law.
That's the law. However, we can only assess or appraise what we know. And if we don't know what you've done to your property, we can't make any changes or upgrade. So we're always asking folks to make sure we have the correct information in our records. Square footage, enclosed porches, new patios, new pools, decks, docks, whatever it might be, additions to your home, upgrades to your home, all of that is appropriate. The burden of proof is on the taxpayer to let us know and to also argue that, we want to make sure we're not over-assessing people. So we're going to do the best we can to make sure that what we have on our records is accurate. When it sells, we usually pick it up. The realtors make sure they put everything in that home in a good light because you want to get the most from that. It behooves everyone to have accurate information because then one person isn't overtaxed compared to the others. And we have to work on a methodology of equity. We don't overtax one person and undertax somebody else. We try to make sure our data is complete and equal based on what you have.
And also, your data lags the market because you're looking at sales, I'm going to get the time frame wrong, but kind of a year ago, and for tax bills that we're not going to pay for another 6 months. So there's, in the market that's going up, you're going to be a little bit trailing. In a market that's going down, you might not be quite catching that either. It's just the timing.
That's correct. We pick a snapshot in time to value property for each tax cycle, which is January 1st of each year. At that point, we look in the rears of everything that occurred the prior year. So any sale that occurred in 2018 that reflects our market now will show up actually on the tax bills that go out in December of this year and June of the following year. So it's literally a year to a year and a half behind. We do pick up new construction and additions and things along the way, but in general, the sales that reflect the value increases, and they temper everything. It's not just the sales that increase, but that increases the overall average assessments as well.
And then that builds the city's tax base, as well. Now, what we find in Hampton is that, and I think you mentioned this in your report, we are heavily dependent on the residential. We don't have 25% of our land in commercial uses, and we do have, about 25 tax exempt. So there's a lot of properties that aren't on the market. We have a lot of wonderful federal and state institutions, but it's good for jobs, it's good for people, it's good for services. It doesn't help the tax base a whole lot.
Right. But that's a fixed circumstance. It's not like last year all of this property became exempt and now there's an extra burden. That exempt portion of our tax base has always been there.
But it just shifts the burden a little bit more to the homeowner because the city, that's the city's biggest way to raise money.
Right. Absolutely. 70 to 80% of our tax base is based on the property tax. We are increasing our commercial and industrial tax base. We're always looking for new things. There's a lot of new development, a lot of new apartments, multifamily, commercial developments, city center, downtown Hampton, Phoebus. There are lots of new up-and-coming properties that are adding to our tax base, which is keeping the overall tax rate down as a burden on the residential folks. So obviously we want more. We don't want to dominate the whole lovely city of Hampton, which is a very residential base. You don't want to destroy that, but you want the services to be here rather than to go to our neighbors, because we then get that base and it minimizes the effect on the residential, which it has done fairly well in terms of the affordability. Right.
And then the other situation is that we're largely built out. I forget the exact percentages, but somewhere 92% or northward. We've got a lot of wetlands, which, the regulations about building near that have changed a lot lately. So for Hampton, a lot of development is redevelopment. It's taking out underused properties or properties that are falling apart and having them rebuild. And does that take a long time. But we are starting to see some results, some things you should be picking up, hopefully.
Right. I mean, I know that the Economic Development Group and the community development has shown over the slow progress of major redevelopment. But you're seeing a lot of the redevelopment of the residential homes. People like flippers, that's a paraphrase, people who come in and buy the home low and sell it after they've renovated it. It's improving the tax base, but it's also improving the neighborhoods. It's bringing in new folks, they're selling it at a higher value, which is then they're paying a higher tax, which doesn't necessarily impact in a negative way the other parts. In fact, it raises the whole thing. I like to use the word that a rising tide raises all boats. So as these renovations happen, whether they're commercial or residential, they bring the value of the neighborhoods up. So it's a more valuable neighborhood without necessarily increasing the assessments of your property.
If they're individual homes, that doesn't affect the whole. You do generally assessments by neighborhood, but when something that you know of changes in an individual house, that property gets reassessed individually.
And that'll bring your taxes up perhaps more relative to others that haven't been renovated. If everybody is sort of similar in the neighborhood, that rising tide is because it's just either inflation or the market is gradually increasing.
Well, and it helps because, as I said, most buyers want a move-in ready house. I'm perfectly happy renovating, my old house, but a lot of people aren't. And so flippers, while they may be a derogatory term sometimes, do a huge service because a lot of people don't want to do that themselves.
Well, I don't think flippers is a derogatory term. I think it's just that it's the folks who are handymen or contractors.
Some of us want to do it,
and they bring value back to the neighborhood.
They do, efficiently.
And it provides the turnover. Usually they'll buy the worst house in the neighborhood and make it one of the best. That's a good trend no matter where you are, no matter where you live. You would love everybody in your neighborhood to be increasing their value. You choose to increase your value, then God bless you, you've done that for yourself. It's going to provide a better opportunity, and even if your house isn't improved, the rising tide of that neighborhood a better
put it in
place to
demand.
live, it brings the value up.
That's what, I've been watching the statistics. There are fewer homes on the market. They're staying on the market for shorter periods of time. I mean, we are seeing that demand tick up, and that will eventually create more opportunities, more renovations, or more areas where they're tearing things down and rebuilding and building new construction. It's going to be an exciting time. It's just sometimes happens slower than we would like.
Well, and there's nothing wrong with slow and steady. And I think that the affordability of Hampton is getting out.
Yeah.
And that's the good news, that sort of to bring this all back to the circle. Hampton's an affordable place to live. As people realize that they can get the same services, the same amenities for a lower price, either buying it or in terms of the tax burden, because it's substantially less, upwards of 35 to 50% less of a tax burden to live in our neighboring cities. That's a big number when you're talking about $500 to $1,000 more on a tax bill to live in a neighboring town. Given that things are improving in Hampton with the amenities, with the schools, with the services, it's nothing but a good circumstance.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, Gary, if people have questions about their assessment, they've gotten the card in the mail, they think it's too low, they think it's too high, there's a procedure for if they want to appeal or if they want to ask questions. How do we go about that? You want to refer people to the website?
Right. Our website is hampton.gov. You can go on there at any time, go to the assessor's webpage. You can stop in our office at, I think it's 1 Franklin. I'm sorry, I'm so new, I forget the address.
That's it. We got the Rupert Sargent Building, 1 Franklin Street. Yep.
Right.
The
and
other
stop
City
in
Hall.
and talk to any of us in the assessor's office on the 6th floor. We'd be happy to answer any questions. Give us a call. Get on the website. We're happy to explain what's going on. The appeal period does run through the end of February. It's not a long appeal period, basically 5 to 6 weeks after the notices went out. But we can answer any questions at any time.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robin.
And thank you for watching. I hope you've learned a little bit more about the assessment process, about what's going on in Hampton, about the value of our homes in general, not your home specifically, but in general, and what the market looks like out there, and that it is trending upward. Thank you so much for watching.